Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us with our fireside chat about leading high-performance remote-first teams post-pandemic. So I'm Emma Giles, co-founder and COO of Sophia. So we provide an interactive platform for companies to establish their virtual headquarters. And I'm joined by Heather McKelvey, VP of Engineering at LinkedIn. So today we're going to be chatting about how to lead high-performance teams in our new normal, which includes all remote as well as hybrid. So let's start with an open-ended question for you, Heather. So what are you seeing out there in terms of the landscape of what companies are at least planning to do post-pandemic? And just before we get started, give you a chance to think about that. I just want to let everyone here know that we do have a Q&A tab within the system here. So please post your questions and we'll try to work them in. Heather, over to you.
Excellent. Emma, I think we're all seeing people being much more open to working remotely. The responses are across the board as to whether people want to work remotely, right? Some people are saying, I want to do this permanently. Some people are saying, I'd like to do a mixed mode. Other people are saying, get me back into the office now. Reopen the baristas in the lunchrooms, please. It's a full mixture. And so we found we can be, we have found different ways of being productive working remotely that we didn't know necessarily we could do before. And so it's been an interesting 14 months, but we also have seen a little bit of rise in anxiety and sometimes mental health. What have you seen, Emma?
Yeah, I love that that you bring that up. You know, I think we've seen on the customer side, we're seeing a mix of everything as well. A lot of interest and knowledge, and we need to be more flexible. But what does that look like? And then on the hybrid side, it seems like one of the big questions people are trying to answer is how do we allow people to connect? How do we bring them back together, but while still keeping that flexibility available? And I think this is going to be really interesting to navigate. Is how do we do that while also still not going back to, if you are remote, you are now sort of more of a second-class citizen. We want to be able to provide that flexibility while allowing people to grow, lead, and connect with humans. So I think navigating that seems to be the challenge on people's minds, and then these different models are emerging as people think about that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing it's exposed is also, if you were not working in the headquarters, you actually got to experience what it meant to work in a satellite office too. Which I think was enlightening for a lot of us.
Absolutely. And I think, the piece there is we may even have an opportunity as we look forward to connect satellite offices in a way that we maybe otherwise wouldn't have thought about due to the technology that we sort of adopted over the pandemic. So I've also seen this like broadening of mindset of how we can be more remote, more connected remotely than we may have ever thought about before, which I think is really exciting, especially for bigger companies. I'd love to know sort of, so what you've done here is sort of painted a broad sort of canvas for us about like, where are we going? Well, it's kind of anywhere, all over the map with digital and hybrid. If we were to say, sort of take the second block of what is our topic here on high performing teams, give us like a brushstroke of what you would call like high performing teams and their attributes so that we can start to weave those two together.
Yeah. So a little bit about my team. My team does infrastructure. Doesn't do applications. We do distributed systems. I think when you're doing applications, a high-performing team is very much one based out, get a feature out there, see how well it encourages engagement, see how well people like it, etc. On infrastructure, it's slightly different because your customers are, quite frankly, the rest of engineering. And so a high-performing team in engineering really is focusing on providing the infrastructure that makes it easier for the rest of our customers, the rest of engineering, to build those applications, making sure that we're providing resilient infrastructure that can actually heal itself, that can auto-scale itself, that can detect health issues. And let's say a node goes bad, we can automatically relocate an instance, things like that, so that humans don't have to be involved. So a little bit of a difference on a high performance team. In both cases, we we at LinkedIn value engineering on 3 major pillars. The first is leadership, the second is execution, and the third is craftsmanship.
Mm-hmm.
And high-performing teams do well on all 3. Leadership is exhibited in many different ways, as we all know, and I think that's pretty common across most businesses. Execution, we all kind of know. Did you get it done? Or did you learn something? Because that is getting something done.
Totally.
And then craftsmanship is really around, did you build something that can be easily maintained, can scale, is high performing? And quite frankly, that teaches someone else a best practice on how to implement this pattern. And so that communication is key, right? So some of the things we've found is let's over communicate on certain things. And then let's be very respectful on how we communicate. So reviews. When somebody does a commit to production, be respectful. Make sure that you are giving the review, that you're educating when you're doing the review, and don't make it the last thing you do at the end of every day. Make it something that you're recognizing somebody else's time zone so that they can actually get their work in a timely manner. And then the other part is, quite frankly, I think we've all mentioned it. We need to communicate. LinkedIn actually runs on relationships. Relationships matter. So scheduling of meetings has been something that for many of us has become almost a burden.
Yeah. So how are you navigating that? You know, especially, so we've got a lot of questions here. So one of them is sort of wondering, was your team, so paint a little bit of a backstory for us. Was your team remote or flexible or completely in person beforehand? And then where are you guys heading post-pandemic? And then how are you navigating, we could start where you just ended, which is communication is so critical for what you just defined as high-performing team. How are you sort of navigating that from the learnings you've had over the last, just over a year?
Yes, so before we started this, some of our team was remote to begin with. The team is distributed in New York, Sunnyvale, San Francisco, and Bangalore. And so that goes back to my enlightening that the folks who were not in Sunnyvale finally got to show the folks who are in Sunnyvale what it's like. The team, pretty much, we got sent home on March 6th. Boom, that was it. Don't come back in. And we've all been working from home since March 6th. What we have done is we've automated a lot of the productivity metrics for LinkedIn, so we can actually see what were the commit to public. We do continuous deployment. So what were the commit to production beforehand and what happened after? And what we did see was actually for the first few months, productivity went up if you're just counting commit to production. And then it went down because, time sets in. People need a little bit of time to balance out. A lot of the problems were people were not taking DTO, right? Some of us who tend to work a little too much from the beginning needed to actually start saying, wait a minute, stop. I'm stuck in my back bedroom. I need to stop. As my husband put it one time, he walked into the room and he said, "Woman, shut your laptops." It cracked me up. I thought that was hilarious, but I shut my laptops. And I think his point to me was set your boundaries. So a couple of things we started doing with folks. Normally, LinkedIn shuts down twice a year for 1 week each. We purposefully shut down an extra week, the beginning of April, because people weren't taking time off. They weren't taking breaks. For me, setting the boundaries included taking at least 2 30-minute slots per day and not scheduling anything. No meetings, no nothing. Not responding to the Slacks, not responding to the Teams messages, just saying, this is my focus time. And setting the boundaries for me has been extremely helpful. And I've talked to a number of folks on my team, and they felt that intentionally doing that, some of them first said, no, that's not fair. I'm taking myself out of communications. Like, no, that's fair to you. So what used to be easy, which is, let me drop by Emma and talk to her for 10 minutes, is always scheduled now.
Yep. Well, and I think there's another piece there that you're sort of highlighting, which is, we saw that pendulum swing at the start of the pandemic where there was nothing else to do and we had no certainty around, is this temporary? And so I think drilling into work gave us a sense of connection to other people that we knew. We otherwise, couldn't access a lot of people. We certainly felt like we had so much more time to do it. And I think you and I were just talking about before we got in here, there's a whole set of consequences when that pendulum swings too far. And then we sort of have to recalibrate. And in the digital world, we have to think about, well, how are we going to be proactive in scheduling? And I think one of the things you said that we talk a lot about on our team as well is there's this initial thought that if I block time off from others, I'm not endlessly available. And we have to remind each other, like, that's actually a good thing. And if we think about performance, we have energy that we're trying to manage. You're not going to be able to be your high performing self once you deplete beyond a certain level. And I think, the sudden launch early in March into this is the new, I think as you're highlighting, there was a lot of recalibration around how to navigate that and create those boundaries. But those boundaries, I'm sure, I'd love to hear what you think, but I'm sure you found they're actually really important for being a high performing team. Your performance wanes if we just continue to stay on all the time.
Yes, you hit it on the head. It's if you're going to maintain high performance, you have to maintain the ability to stop, to let go, to relax, and especially with a certain amount of. And the other thing is, quite frankly, to recognize where other people are in their positions, because not everybody's in the same state. So I was talking to somebody I mentor, and she had luckily gotten a coach right before the pandemic. And she had said to her coach, and she lives alone, and she had said to her coach, I'm depressed. And her coach was smart enough to say, walk her through it. And finally her coach said, you're depressed because you're mourning the life you used to have. And you don't have that now. And so part of this is also reminding each other that we're all in a different position. We're all feeling something different. What amazed me is the people who are caregivers in their families, that you needed to give them even more time. And you needed to give them even more flexibility. So one of my directors, who's a very high performer, he just went to working. He and his wife traded off. One of them would work 7 to 1, the other one would work 1 to 7 because they have 2 small children, and they trade off each day. And he put those boundaries in place, and he was not working more than 6 hours a day. Great. Working 6 hours, high performing, is better than working 10 hours feeling 50%.
Absolutely. And how do you find, I was looking just at our chat here, we've got people, of course, want more tactical things as well. What are things that, we as leadership can do to support this? As we think about this remote continuing or even hybrid, this will continue to be something people are struggling with. So how do we support, how do we encourage, what have you learned over the last while for things that we can do that are more tactical?
I learned this from one of our HR folks, and it's surprisingly simple. It's, how are you doing, Emma?
Such a good question. I get the, how are you on a scale of 1 to 10? I'm like, ooh, 7? How are you, Heather?
I'm doing well, but I also, we purposefully started our discussions with spending the first 5 minutes talking about each other personally. It gives you a little bit more insight. We probably did that in office, but not intentionally. And you almost have to do it intentionally now.
Absolutely. It's something that you just do when you're walking past someone or grabbing something. You don't even have to think about it. And now it's similar to what you were saying before about we also have to intentionally schedule in buffer or boundaries. It's a similar thing. And so, I love your question is, so we as like leaders and managers, we can think, how do we almost put that in by having it at the start of a conversation? We can bake it right into the context of what we're doing.
Yes, and especially when we're talking about, this pandemic has ebbed and flowed, right? At first, New York was terrible, right? And we had to be we were very concerned there. And then it started different areas. Europe got worse. California, obviously, and Washington State obviously had some bad times. And right now, everybody really has to be very well aware of everybody who either has family in India or is in India and or Brazil. And so starting out with that question of checking in with them, I think is really helpful.
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, the dynamics are so different where everyone is and everyone's in different places. So it almost resets us back to that openness of like, I don't know where you are and I don't know what's going on for you, but I really want to understand. And that just creates that opening, which I love. There's another sort of thread I was going to pull on here that I'm sort of seeing in our chat, which is there's another side to high performance, which is, especially if as a company that cares so deeply about this, that ideally there's a system of developing high performance so that the entire company is always becoming higher and higher performing. So one of the challenges that we've had is how do we make sure that teammates are getting the mentorship and the growth that they need in a more remote world, something that might have happened more casually in the office. How are you guys thinking about, sort of growing your high performers or developing your high performers in a more digital world?
Great question. So I think two things we kind of doubled down on, which is don't just get a mentor, get a board of mentors. If you wish to talk to them separately, fine. But there may be value in actually bringing your board together to talk to them as well. Look past mentorship and look for sponsors. And a sponsor is different than a mentor, right? A mentor is somebody you can discuss something very personal with. You can discuss what you feel your positive strengths and opportunities are, etc. The sponsor is the person who's in the room you're not in, championing you. And so teaching people how to, what a sponsor relationship is, has been somewhat key for us in making sure that people are driving their own success.
I love that. It's like a higher leverage approach, like teach teammates about the concepts so that they can go and basically take personal responsibility for getting that for themselves, which is a far more scalable solution than if you were sort of trying to be on the ground, providing that for each person.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We also do some things called employee voice surveys, and we just kicked off something called Build, Manage, Lead, where it's an anonymous, here's your way to give direct feedback to your manager. Are you having one-on-ones? Are you having career discussions? And it's not unusual for managers to forget, or leaders to forget, this person will drive the career discussion with me. Well, not everybody does that. So literally saying, let's talk about where you want your career to be in a month or in a year or in 2 years is extremely important. And so encouraging the proactiveness in those questions is key as well.
And I think that's such an important, it's such an important thread for, as we move into a more flexible world, we need that in all areas. If we're talking about, the office might have provided boundaries for you before, now you need to be more proactive in scheduling them. We may have had casual bump-ins be more easy, now you need to be more proactive in scheduling them. So I think there's a thread that you sort of have woven through everything here, which is, and I think that's how you scale it as well. There's a level of like pushing that proactivity to the individual, and of course creating systems around them to support it, which I think is a really powerful thing for us to all think about as we think about our new world of work.
And I want to go back to the original question, was how do you constantly raise the bar? Don't constantly raise the bar. Seriously, raise the bar, stop, celebrate. And celebration has gotten a little bit more difficult, so find unique ways to start celebrating. And then, when the team's ready for it, raise the bar.
I love that you say that. There's also, sometimes you don't notice, you raise the bar and you don't actually notice if the person has had a chance to reach it for a little while. Like there can be a downstream effect. We had an example recently where we'd raised the bar and we thought that the team had really internalized it, but then we waited until they had to implement it and we could see that they actually needed a few more cycles to be able to operate at that higher level. And so I think what you said is wonderful, which is raise the bar, let it play out, celebrate those wins, and then raise it again. And again, providing that structure around people to be able to grow and fail. Someone just asked us a question that's actually very related to this. Where is it here? Oh, I lost it. There's so many. We have so many questions. I think the idea here is in a more digital and remote world, how are you guys thinking about celebrating? So if that's like a key piece of how we get people to continue to be high performers is about stopping, celebrating, and then raising again. How are you guys thinking about the celebration component?
So we've done some interesting things. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. But one of the things we've moved into just all hands is one of my favorite games is who did what? So what we'll do is we'll put a picture of 3 people. And the title is, one of the most recent ones, the title was State Ping Pong Championship when he went in high school. And we put up 3 pictures and people had to, annotate who they thought it was. And then we revealed who it was, right?
I love that.
Yeah. Jumped off a cliff in Jamaica, 40 feet into the ocean. Who did that, right? So breaking up some serious meetings with small bits of fun and humor is good. Also, just the happy hours got old pretty quick,
Yeah, I think that was only about a month in, right? A month or 2 in, I think that got old.
Yes, but the magicians, where people could bring their families and watch and interact with the magician, that didn't get old, especially for people with kids, right?
Who are now trying to entertain their kids on a different cycle than before.
Yeah. So also targeting different types of things to people in different situations, right? So people with kids or caregivers just get together and with an expert about how to better manage caregiving. Those kinds of things, while they're not necessarily fun, they actually do bring people together so they can discuss with people going through the same thing, how to better manage their personal life. For me, I've replaced the battery in my car twice because I didn't drive it in a year. It's like, okay.
Well, I love that you just, I think one of the things that ties back to what we were talking about before is that the new world of work has a different kind of blurring between the personal and the professional. And at any given time, it could be personal time for some, while it's professional time for others. And a lot of people are weaving more flexibility into that entirely. And so what you just said was, one of the ways that we can create these celebration moments is also recognizing that people's kids are going to potentially need to show up, or people are having these other memories that you might not otherwise know about. How can we connect you via like celebration or some sort of event that brings you together and actually recognize that you're not just your work person right now. You actually have kids, or you may have just recently jumped off a cliff in Jamaica. And then I think that feeds right back into performance again. Teams that can trust each other, teams that can be, have conflict, can be a little bit more vulnerable, are teams that will perform better together. So I love that you're recognizing that, and bringing it into the celebration.
Yeah, and you brought up a really interesting point. So conflict over Zoom isn't quite the same as conflict in person, is it? Right?
No.
So you can see what I'm doing with my hands because I'm very active with my hands, right? I have no idea what your body language looks like.
I'm playing with something.
So being able to open up that conversation, because I can't read your body language, or you can't read whether I'm sitting there like this because it's not on the screen, right? That's an important part of actually opening up that communication factor that you're pointing out.
Absolutely. And it's very different. We're just sort of, and that also brings us back to is, another part of building high performing teams, getting people to, be at that level. There are tough conversations, one-on-ones, the mentorships, all of that is a part of that. And those are moments they're more challenging, just on a screen. So I think by doing things like what you just said, where we can get people to be a little bit more of their selves, I think we just invite more openness. So I think that's so important. We're sort of in our last 4 minutes here. So one of the things I was going to do is start to pull out of you some of these things. I was talking with the team beforehand. I said, can we make sure everyone walks away with almost these gifts of things that they could think about right away as they go back to their digital or hybrid or whatever teams. And so as we think about looking forward, what we've learned over the last year and a bit, what are some of these more tactical gifts that you could give people, things that they could start thinking about right now as leadership of more digital teams?
Yeah, it open up and make it more than just the career discussion. Make it about life discussion. Ask people, have they set their boundaries? What are their boundaries? So you can be respectful of their boundaries, because we're not going back to what was normal. We're going to something new. And some of this will stay, some of it will evolve, and some of it will change completely. But we've picked up a lot in the last year. And I think a lot of it really has to do with opening up the conversation in ways we hadn't opened up the conversation before. So knowing what some of these boundaries are, like my director who only works 6 hours a day, that's his boundary. Fine. Respect it. Knowing my boundaries and opening up and telling people what they are. Don't just hide them from them. Literally say, I'm sorry, I take 30 minutes every day during this time and I'm not available. So they can actually be respectful of it as well. So I don't think that over communication is going to go away. Do you?
No, I don't think so. I think we're going to need it. I think it's going to be so important.
Yeah. And I think the last thing is to recognize not just your boundaries, but when you are actually reaching the point where I can't get on another Teams or Zoom call. And respect that.
Absolutely. It's like energy management. So your own and then others around you, recognizing that you can communicate that and it's okay. And others around you, especially in leadership, can create an environment where that's actually a good thing. I think that's very proactive.
What are some of your takeaways, Emma?
I think that, one of the things we've noticed is that, and I'll keep it brief here because it's just the last minute, but one of the things we've noticed is that we think a lot of it really comes down to just recognizing that people are people, they need to be connected with people. And so we need to be proactive and thoughtful, just as you have been in this whole conversation around how do we cultivate that? How do we respect that? And how do we bake that into everything that we're doing, which is, I love everything that you said, because it all sort of came back to that. People are people. This new world is going to be different to navigate. Digital is challenging, but it has opportunities. So respect that. So we've got 5 seconds here. I just want to say thank you so much, Heather. We learned so much, and I hope all of you did as well.
Thank you, Emma. And shout out to Natat. Hope you're doing well.